The old Land Rover groaned a complaint as it crested the final rise, its engine a familiar rumble against the silence of the Scottish Highlands. Below, the landscape unfolded in a tapestry of muted greens and purples, scarred by the grey veins of ancient rock formations. Rain, a constant companion since Perth, had finally relented, leaving the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and peat smoke that seemed to cling to everything. I gripped the steering wheel, my grip tight, a determination hardening my jaw. This was it. The furthest point from everything I knew, everything I'd lost. The Grant had been a lifeline, a sudden, unexpected anchor thrown into the churning waters of my life. A newly discovered Neolithic site, tucked away in this forgotten corner, promised an intellectual challenge demanding absolute focus. It was the kind of excavation that could consume a man whole, and that, I realized, was precisely what I needed. A quiet penance, perhaps, or simply a deep, dark hole to fall into where the echoes of the past wouldn't reach me. My gaze swept the valley, the shuttered summer camp, my temporary quarters, according to the research coordinator, until a more permanent base could be established closer to the dig site itself. The name had conjured images of quaint, rustic cabins. Reality was a starker proposition. The camp was a collection of low-slung wooden buildings, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin. Windows boarded up with haphazard planks. A rusty flagpole stood bare against the bruised sky, its ropes long gone. A single, rickety pier jutted into the slate-grey water of the Loch, its planks warped and slick with moss. No trace of summer joy remained, only the skeletal remains of forgotten laughter. I nudged the vehicle forward, descending into the valley. The track narrowed, the overgrown heather scraping against the undercarriage. As I drew closer, the details of the camp sharpened into a melancholy tableau. A faded sign, half obscured by thorny brambles, read Loch Corin Summer Retreat. The word retreat felt bitterly ironic. This was no retreat, it was an abandonment. Pulling up beside what appeared to be the main lodge, a slightly larger building with a sagging roof, I cut the engine. The sudden absence of sound was absolute, save for the distant cry of a solitary bird. This isolation, I thought, was precisely what I craved. Just me, the work, and the ancient earth. Stepping out, the wind immediately found me, a keen, damp blade that cut through my jacket. It carried the smell of wet stone, pine needles, and something else, a faint metallic tang, like old iron left out in the rain, but sharper somehow. I dismissed it as the peculiar scent of the Highlands, a local nuance I hadn't yet learned to identify. My designated cabin was at the far end of the camp, a small, solitary structure overlooking the Loch. Inside, the air was stale and frigid, tasting of dust and disuse. A single cot, a rough-hewn table, and a small wood-burning stove comprised the entirety of the furnishings. Light filtered weakly through a grimy window, illuminating dancing motes of dust. I spent the next hour unloading my gear, research materials, excavation tools, a small generator, and enough non-perishable food to last weeks. The physical labor was a welcome distraction, a way to anchor myself in the present. Each box I carried, each item I unpacked, was a small victory against the encroaching emptiness within me. Later, as twilight bled across the sky, painting the Loch in shades of bruised purple and grey, I decided to take a short reconnaissance walk. The dig site was still some distance away, but I wanted to familiarize myself with the immediate surroundings of the camp. The old mess hall, the recreation building, the row of smaller cabins each stood silent, decaying monuments to a bygone era. As I walked along the edge of the Loch, the faint metallic scent I'd noticed earlier seemed to intensify, now mixed with a subtle, earthy undertone I couldn't quite place. It wasn't unpleasant, precisely, but it was wrong. A smell that didn't belong to the clean, crisp air of the Highlands. I knelt, examining the moss-covered stones at the water's edge. The ground here felt strangely compacted, unnaturally firm, as if it had been trodden smooth by countless heavy feet over an impassable span of time. Then I heard it. A sound so faint, so fleeting, I almost dismissed it as the wind playing tricks. A low, guttural hum, like a deep note struck on an ancient, resonant drum, but stretched thin, almost inaudible. It seemed to emanate from beneath the earth itself, a vibration more than a sound, rattling something deep in my chest. I froze, straining my ears, but it vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving only the endless sigh of the wind. The isolation was already beginning to play tricks on my senses. This place, I realized, was not merely quiet. It was listening. The ancient stones around me, half buried in the peat, seemed to hold their breath, waiting. My sanctuary, it seemed, might be nothing more than a cage. The Land Rover, once a companionable rumble, now felt like a lead weight pressing into the earth. I'd parked it a short distance from the cairn, the ancient stones looming like broken teeth against the bruised sky. My breath plumed white in the frigid air, a stark contrast to the verdant expanse that stretched to the horizon. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, clinging to the wool of my jacket, seeping into the collar. Ahead, the low, mounded earth of the burial site beckoned, a silent promise of knowledge, and I hoped. Oblivion from the ghosts that clung to me. I spent the rest of that afternoon setting up a basic shelter, a canvas tarpaulin stretched taut between a few sturdy poles, secured against the relentless Highland wind. The ground was uneven, a patchwork of coarse grass and exposed rock, making every step a deliberate act of balance. As dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray, I cooked a meager meal over a small gas stove, the flame a tiny defiant flicker against the encroaching gloom. The silence out here wasn't empty. It hummed with the whisper of the wind through dry heather, the distant bleating of unseen sheep, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to resonate from the very earth beneath my boots. I told myself it was just the blood rushing in my ears, the isolation playing tricks. The next morning, armed with trowel, brush, and the meticulous patience of my profession, I began. The cairn itself was a modest affair, certainly not a grand chamber tomb, but its weathered stones held an undeniable presence. I started at the periphery, clearing away the topsoil, revealing the larger, rough-hewn boulders that formed the outer ring. The earth was stubborn, a dense mixture of peat and gritty clay, smelling of damp root and something deeper, something mineral and cold. Every scrape of my trowel, every sweep of my brush, felt amplified in the vast quiet. Hours blurred, my back ached, my fingers grew stiff, but the methodical nature of the work was a balm. The first few finds were unremarkable, flint flakes, fragments of coarse pottery expected for a Neolithic site. I meticulously catalogued each piece, assigning it a grid reference, cleaning it with a soft brush. My trowel struck not rock, but something smoother, denser. Carefully, I widened the excavation, brushing away the clinging soil. Its surface was carved, not with geometric patterns or depictions of animals, but with a series of intricate, swirling lines that seemed to writhe and intertwine. They weren't symmetrical, weren't orderly. They felt organic, like veins or roots pressing inward on themselves. As I traced the carvings with a gloved finger, a prickle ran up my spine. I glanced around, half expecting to see a cloud pass overhead, but the sky was clear above me, a deepening azure. The distant bleating of the sheep had ceased. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I continued to excavate, spurred by a morbid curiosity. Beneath the first stone, partially buried, was another. This one was smaller, a fist-sized effigy carved from what felt like petrified bone, its surface strangely smooth and oily to the touch. It depicted no recognizable creature, but a distorted, elongated form with too many angles, too many sharp points. Its features were indistinct. Yet I felt a profound sense of malice emanating from it, a malevolent stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I told myself it was fatigue, the overactive imagination of a man too long in solitude. I jerked upright, dropping the bone effigy back into the loose soil with a soft thud. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, shocking noise. A figure stood at the edge of the site, silhouetted against the last vestiges of twilight. They were a short, stocky individual, bundled in a thick waxed jacket, carrying a large, leather-bound satchel. William, I presume. The voice was surprisingly gentle, a soft burr of a Highland accent cutting through the heavy air like a knife. My initial fear gave way to a surge of annoyance, then a flicker of relief. Company. I hadn't seen another soul since I'd passed the derelict shell of the shuttered summer camp on the way in, its empty windows staring like blind eyes. That's me, I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. And you are? The stranger stepped closer, revealing a kindly, weathered face under a tweed cap. My apologies for the intrusion. I'm the local historian. Heard you were setting up shop here. Thought I'd offer a hand, or at least some local perspective. He gestured vaguely towards the cairn. Not many come to these parts looking for old stones anymore. The last fellow? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My eyes drawn back to the dark slab and the unsettling bone. The colleague's smile faltered, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He turned, gesturing vaguely at the mist-shrouded hills. "He didn't take to the isolation," he murmured, his voice flat. "Some folk aren't cut out for this kind of quiet. Gets to them, I know, makes them see things." He left it hanging in the damp air, a question mark more unsettling than any direct answer. I watched him go, his figure swallowed by the creeping fog, leaving me alone with the ancient stone, the inexplicable bone, and a chill that had nothing to do with the Highland air. That night, the quiet in my small cabin was anything but peaceful. Every creak of the old timber, every gust of wind rattling the window panes, seemed amplified, imbued with a strange, watchful quality. I tried to focus on my notes, the preliminary sketches of the site, but my concentration frayed. Diagram of the central megalith blurred, the lines seeming to shift and writhe on the page. I pushed the papers away, opting for a mug of scalding tea. I spun around, my heart giving a clumsy thump against my ribs. Nothing, just the patterned wallpaper, faded and peeling. My breath hitched. Lack of sleep, I told myself, the strain of travel. But the silence wasn't absolute. Later, as I lay in bed, the wind outside began to mimic something more insidious. William. Soft. Insistent, like a forgotten memory trying to claw its way back. I pulled the rough woolen blanket tighter around my chin, my scalp prickling. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. The following days blurred into a pattern of escalating unease. The air carried a faint, persistent scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old blood, but deeper, older. I'd glance up from my trowel, convinced I'd seen a flicker of movement among the standing stones, a fleeting, gaunt figure retreating behind the gray monoliths. Each time there was nothing. Only the impassive stones, the endless sky, and the relentless wind. The unsettling bone, still nestled in its plastic bag in my field kit, seemed to draw my gaze whenever I opened the box. It felt heavier somehow. I saw faces, indistinct and contorted, their mouths open in silent screams. I heard the muffled thud of impact, the snap of brittle things, and always the crushing weight of guilt. A familiar phantom limb ache that had followed me here, now intensified, almost physical. One afternoon, seeking a break from the relentless scrutiny of the stones, I decided to explore. The map I'd been given mentioned an old, disused path leading to what was marked simply as community grounds. Following the overgrown track, the trees grew denser, their branches clawing at the gray sky. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp leaves and decay. Then, through a gap in the skeletal birches, I saw it, a shuttered summer camp. It stood like a forgotten monument to happier times, now utterly desolate. Peeling paint clung to the walls of what must have been a main hall, its windows like vacant eyes. A rusted swing set groaned softly in the breeze, its chains creaking a mournful tune. A slide, once bright yellow, was now a grimy orange, half swallowed by weeds. The sense of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I moved towards the main building, my boots crunching on fallen leaves. As I peered through a broken window into the gloom of the hall, I heard it, a faint, high-pitched giggle, then another, louder, accompanied by the distinct patter of small feet on a wooden floor. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my face closer to the grimy pane, my vision straining against the dimness. The sounds continued, a child's playful chatter, a burst of laughter, then a sudden, sharp cry that was instantly cut off. My stomach lurched. There was no one here. The camp was deserted. Then through the dust-coated glass I saw them, not clearly, not like solid figures, but as distorted blurs of movement. One seemed to stumble, then another bent over it, their shapes merging into an indistinct, writhing mass. The metallic scent, that old blood smell, suddenly intensified, cloying and sickening. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose stone, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My gaze darted wildly, trying to rationalize, trying to deny what my senses were screaming at me. Hallucination, isolation. My eyes fell upon a section of the building's outer wall, where the paint had peeled away completely, exposing the raw, gray timber beneath. And there, gouged deeply into the wood, was a symbol, crude, ancient, unmistakable. It was a spiral, yes, but not a simple one. It was a broken spiral, one arm twisting back on itself, ending in a sharp, jagged point. A design I had seen before, etched into one of the smaller, subsidiary stones at the Neolithic site, just beside the place where the unsettling bone had been found. My mind reeled. The symbol here in this abandoned, relatively modern structure, it made no sense. Unless the influence wasn't confined to the ancient burial ground. Unless it had spread. Unless it was finding new places to fester, new ways to manifest. It was no longer childlike. It was ancient, hungry, and utterly malevolent. I wasn't just seeing things anymore. I was being haunted, and the entity knew my name. That night, the quiet in my cabin was a suffocating blanket. Every creak of the old timbers, every gust of wind rattling the single pane of glass, seemed amplified, imbued with a malicious intent. I lay awake, the image of the small, carved bone, so impossibly ancient, so undeniably human, seared behind my eyelids. The groundskeeper's final words, his shadowed face, clung to the corners of my mind like cobwebs. Some things are better left buried. I told myself it was the isolation, the relentless Highland wind, the sheer age of the place finally getting to me. A seasoned archaeologist, I scoffed at my own burgeoning superstitions, yet the scoff felt hollow, brittle. Morning brought no solace. The fog had thinned, revealing a sky the color of bruised plums. The air was heavy, damp, tasting of peat, and something else I couldn't quite place, a metallic tang, perhaps, or the faint, sweet decay of damp earth. I forced myself to eat, the porridge a tasteless paste in my mouth, and then gathered my tools. Logic, empirical evidence, the tangible grit of soil beneath my fingernails, these were my anchors. The central cairn, where I'd found the bone, felt like an open wound in the earth. I began to carefully clear more soil, brushing away centuries of accumulation, searching for patterns, for context, for anything that would explain the anomaly. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. I found more fragments of pottery, rough and unglazed, and then nestled amongst them another bone shard. This one was smaller, a sliver, but undeniably bore the same delicate, intricate carving as the first. A spiral, twisting inwards almost like a vortex. My breath hitched. It wasn't a fluke, it was a motif. Later, as the low sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, the groundskeeper appeared. He didn't approach the site directly, instead lingering by the edge of the perimeter fence, his silhouette stark against the fading light. His usual gruff cheer was absent. He looked gaunt, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting nervously towards the stones, then quickly away. "Anything new, William?" he called out, as if I'd thrown a stone at him. He didn't come closer. "Best leave MB," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Best not disturb what's sleeping." "Sleeping?" I pushed, my determination battling with a growing unease. "What are you talking about?" He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "Used to be a summer camp. Not far from here," he said, changing the subject abruptly. "Kids would come, laugh and play, but then things started happening, strange things moving when no one was looking. They closed it down, the owners said it wasn't profitable, but I know better." He paused, his eyes finally meeting mine, and in them I saw a profound, ancient fear. "The land remembers, William, and it doesn't forget." He turned abruptly, walking away without another word, his figure quickly consumed by the deepening twilight. His words about the shuttered summer camp, about the land remembering, echoed in my mind. I started to unbutton my shirt, intending to wash the grime off, when my gaze snagged on something on my left forearm. A faint mark. It was subtle, almost like a birthmark, a slight discoloration of the skin. But as I leaned closer, bringing the lamp nearer, my heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a birthmark. It was a symbol, etched into my skin. Faint but unmistakable, was the exact same twisting spiral I had found on the ancient bone shards. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat, my mind reeling. How? When I scrubbed at it with my thumb, then with a damp cloth, as if I could simply rub it away. But it was there, an indelible part of me. This wasn't just about the sight anymore. This was about me. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. It wasn't a sound I could pinpoint, more a pressure in the air. A vibration against my eardrums. My hand flew to my forearm, covering the symbol. The entity wasn't just at the site. It wasn't just in the ancient stones. It was here in my cabin, and somehow it was inside me. The isolation, which I had once sought, now felt like a trap tightening its hold. I was no longer alone, and the thing that had found me, had marked me, was far from sleeping. The groundskeeper's words had burrowed under my skin. Clinging like damp wool, the land remembers. I stood there long after he had vanished into the twilight, my gaze fixed on the distant, dark outline of the abandoned structures. The shuttered summer camp. What could it possibly remember? I had dismissed his ramblings as the eccentricities of an old man, but the chill that now snaked up my spine felt too real, too persistent. It wasn't just the Highland wind. It was the echo of something unseen, unheard, yet undeniably present. My initial determination to simply catalog and excavate had curdled into a desperate need for understanding. The groundskeeper wouldn't offer any more, I was sure of it. But Elspeth knew things. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, a flicker of ancient sorrow in her eyes. The walk to her cottage was a gauntlet of imagined threats. Every rustle in the heather, every snap of a twig, sounded like a footfall behind me. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid like old blood. Elspeth's cottage, when I finally reached it, was a squat, defiant shape against the encroaching night. A single lamp cast a weak yellow glow from within, illuminating the rain-streaked window panes. A moment passed, then another. I was about to knock again, harder this time, when the door creaked inward, revealing her silhouette framed by the dim light. She didn't look surprised to see me. The cottage air was thick with the scent of peat smoke, dried herbs, and something else I couldn't place, a musty, earthen smell, like a tomb freshly opened. Bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded. He spoke of the land remembering. He spoke of the shuttered summer camp. He spoke of it. Elspeth moved to a wooden chair by the hearth, sinking into it with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Her eyes, when they met mine, were pools of ancient grief. It has been awakened, hasn't it, by my digging? What is it, Elspeth? The feeling of being watched. I'm not imagining it, am I? He shook his head slowly. No, William, I am not imagining it. It is an ancient consciousness older than the stones themselves, not a spirit, not a ghost as my modern world understands them. It is a hunger, a primal emptiness given form by the earth itself. My mind reeled. A hunger for what? For life, for consciousness, for a vessel. Her gaze intensified, pinning me. It was imprisoned long, long ago by the first people who walked this land. They understood its nature, its insatiable need. They understood it fed on despair, on guilt, on sorrow. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Guilt, sorrow, my constant companion since the accident. Had I been feeding it all this time without knowing? They performed a ritual, Elspeth continued, her voice gaining a low, resonant power, a terrible one, a sacrifice not of a single life but of many, a binding. They carved the stones not just as markers but as locks. They poured their own suffering, their own fear into the earth, creating a scar that held it captive, a scar that marked this entire valley. I thought of the shuttered summer camp, the desolate buildings, the sense of abandonment. The camp is that part of it. The land remembers, she repeated, echoing the groundskeeper. The camp was built on the edges of that scar, a place of forced joy, of youthful energy, but the scar remains, and my digging, I have picked at the wound, William, I have disturbed the binding. A tremor ran through me. So it's free now, not entirely, not yet, but it grows stronger. It feeds on William, on my grief for my family, on my regret, on the terrible weight I carry. It seeks to break free completely, to spread beyond this valley, and it needs a way out. It needs a body, a vessel. My breath caught in my throat. A vessel, you are vulnerable. You carry the very sustenance it craves. The scent of ancient earth intensified. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming horror. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a conscious, predatory entity, and I had unknowingly invited it into my life, into my very mind. I must leave, William, he urged, his voice low and urgent. Now, before it is too late, before it consumes I entirely. Leave, flee. All this time I had questioned my sanity. All this time I had thought I was succumbing to the weight of my past. But it wasn't just me, it was it, and it was real. I had to understand this. I had to stop it. I couldn't just abandon the site, abandon the valley, and let this thing loose. Not after what I had already done. No, I replied, the word a ragged exhalation. I can't. Elspeth's eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to fear in their depths. She knew what I was contemplating. She knew the terrible resolve that had suddenly solidified within me, born of desperation and a twisted sense of responsibility. I had woken it, and now I had to face it. The rumble of the engine was the only sound I trusted, a mechanical pulse against the vast, indifferent silence of the Highlands. Elspeth's face, etched with that fleeting fear, had been a mirror to my own burgeoning terror, but it had also solidified something colder, harder in my gut. Responsibility, a terrible, crushing weight of it. I had disturbed something ancient, something that now sought to consume. The track narrowed, gravel giving way to churned mud, and the trees pressed in, their branches skeletal against the bruised twilight sky. Then, through a gap in the gnarled pines, I saw it, the shuttered summer camp. It was a collection of low-slung wooden buildings, gray with neglect, their windows boarded over like sightless eyes. A faded sign, half-rotted, hung crooked from a rusty post, its cheerful painted letters long since flaked away. The air here was different, thick and still, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying timber, and something else, a faint metallic tang like old blood mixed with rain. I cut the engine. My hands, though my own, felt distant as I opened the door. I moved towards the largest building, a long, barracks-like structure with a wide, sagging porch. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground clung to my soles, unwilling to release me. The entity was here. It had been drawing me, guiding me, its tendrils of influence tightening with every mile I'd put behind me. A low thrum began in the base of my skull, a vibration that intensified with each breath, each beat of the frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't pain, not yet, but a profound disquiet, a sense of something pushing at the fragile walls of my consciousness. My vision blurred at the edges, the world around me seeming to waver, to become less real. I reached the porch. The wood groaned under my weight, protesting my intrusion. My fingers, unbidden, went to the latch of the main door. It was old, rusted, but it yielded with a soft click, as if waiting. The door swung inward on a dry, rasping hinge, revealing an interior steeped in perpetual gloom. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced the gaps in the boards, swirling like tiny, malevolent spirits. This must have been the mess hall or perhaps a recreation room. Long, empty tables were overturned, chairs scattered, some broken, others merely abandoned. And then I felt it. It wasn't mine. I tried to fight it, to clench my jaw, to resist the urge to step further into the room, but my legs moved. My feet carried me forward, clumsy and slow, towards the center of the room. No, I thought, a desperate, silent plea, stop. But my body didn't listen. It wasn't mine anymore, not entirely. My hands, those familiar extensions of my will, rose before me. They were steady, unyielding. They reached for an overturned wooden crate, pulling it upright with surprising strength. Then, from the pockets of my jacket, they began to extract items. The fragments of ancient pottery I'd collected from the site, the small, smooth river stones I'd found near the standing circle, even the crude, bone-like carving I'd unearthed from the deepest trench. My body arranged them on the makeshift altar, a grotesque tableau forming under the entity's guidance. A guttural sound escaped my throat, a low, resonant chant that vibrated through my chest. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew, yet I understood its intent. It was an invocation, a summoning, a breaking of bonds. My own voice, twisted and deepened, echoed in the cavernous room, a horrifying testament to my loss of control. Inside, I screamed, I thrashed, I clawed at the invisible restraints that held my consciousness captive. This is not me, this is not me. My mind raced, trying to find a purchase, a leverage point, anything to wrench back control. I felt like I was drowning, watching my own reflection perform a monstrous act. A vision flared behind my eyes, not a memory, but a sudden, horrific insight. I saw the Neolithic site, not as it was now, but as it had been millennia ago. Fires burning low, figures cloaked in rough hides, chanting under a moonless sky. The entity was not merely awakened, it was seeking release, a full, untethered return to this realm. The ground I had disturbed, the bones I had uncovered, the very air I had breathed at the site, it had all been a conduit. And I, William, was the final lock. My hands moved with swift, unsettling precision. They found a shard of obsidian I'd brought back, believing it to be a tool for cutting hides. My arm, no longer mine, raised it. The chant intensified, growing louder, more desperate, pushing against the fragile barrier of my sanity. A searing pain lanced through my palm as my body pressed the obsidian point into its own flesh. A warm, sticky rivulet traced a path down my wrist. My blood. The metallic scent in the air grew stronger, cloying. My body swayed, the chant reaching a fever pitch. I felt a tremendous surge of power, a malevolent energy that flooded the room, making the air crackle and hum. It coursed through my veins, not as warmth, but as an icy fire, burning away the last vestiges of my own will. Almost free. I was a spectator in my own destruction, watching as my body completed the ritual. The obsidian was placed deliberately on the altar, its tip still glistening. My blood, a testament to the entity's triumph, pulsed faintly on the stone. A low, guttural growl vibrated through my chest, a sound of profound satisfaction, but it was not my satisfaction. It was the entity's. The air thickened, heavy with a presence that was no longer just within me, but all around me. It was vast, ancient, and utterly, terrifyingly real. The bindings were broken. The entity was loose. There was no turning back. The point of no return had been breached, not by my choice, but by its will. The guttural growl that shuddered through my chest was not my own. It was a sound of profound, ancient satisfaction, resonating from the very stone beneath my knees, a vibration that threatened to unravel the fibers of my being. The obsidian, slick with my offering, pulsed with a faint, internal light, mirroring the thrumming in my veins. I was a puppet, my hands still splayed on the altar, my will a distant, muffled whisper against the roar of something vast and terrible awakening. My blood, a dark, viscous smear, connected me to the stone, to the entity, to the irreversible act I had just completed. I could feel its gaze, 1,000 pinpricks of ice on my skin, stripping away my sanity layer by layer. Guilt, old and fresh, clawed at my throat. I had done this. I had opened the door. The local guide, her face grim and etched with determination, burst into the clearing. She held aloft a crudely carved wooden idol, blackened with age and smeared with what looked like dried ochre. As she thrust it forward, chanting words that were harsh and unfamiliar, a wave of shimmering light, faint but undeniably present, emanated from the idol. The entity recoiled. It was a shriek that ripped at the edges of my hearing, vibrating in my teeth. The local guide pressed her advantage, her chant growing louder, more urgent. The obsidian on the altar dulled, its internal light flickering like a dying ember. My blood, still on the stone, seemed to evaporate, leaving behind only a faint metallic stain. The entity, weakened but furious, did not vanish. It moved with an impossible speed, a blur of malevolence tearing through the ancient woodland. "It's retreating," the local guide gasped, his voice hoarse, his arm still extended with the idol. "It's not destroyed, William, just wounded. It's going to find another place to anchor itself, to feed." My mind, still reeling from the entity's touch, struggled to process her words. Where would it go? She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "There's an old place, a site of concentrated emotion, fear, despair, loneliness. It would draw strength from that. A shuttered summer camp not far from here. It's been abandoned for decades, but the echoes, they linger." A shudder ran through me. A summer camp, the thought was sickening. I had awakened this thing, I had to contain it. "We have to follow it," I answered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The local guide nodded, a grim resolve hardening her features. The chase was a blur of frantic movement through the rough terrain. We crashed through undergrowth, my breath ragged in my chest, the scent of damp earth and pine needles thick in my nostrils. When we finally broke through a screen of overgrown rhododendrons, the sight that greeted us was like a wound in the landscape. The shuttered summer camp stood silent and desolate under the bruised sky. A cluster of decaying wooden cabins, their windows boarded up or shattered, huddled around a central, larger building, its paint peeling in long, ragged strips. The air here was thick with a palpable sense of abandonment, of lives abruptly halted. A swing set stood frozen midair. Its chains rusted, the seats long gone. As we stepped onto the cracked asphalt path, I noticed a faint, sweet and sour odor, like damp wood mixed with something metallic and vaguely organic. It clung to the air, an unsettling perfume of decay and something else. She clutched the idol tighter, her grip tight. "It's already begun to feed." I could feel it now, the entity's presence, not as a physical form, but as a pressure in my skull, a subtle draining of warmth and hope. It was drawing sustenance from the lingering echoes of fear, of homesickness, of childish anxieties that had once filled this place. The reveal/discovery was sickeningly clear. This camp was not just a hiding place, it was a larder. The despair of generations of children, left behind and forgotten, was now its feast. We moved stealthily, our footsteps crunching on fallen leaves and broken glass. We found the entity in the largest building, the old dining hall. It was a vast, cavernous space filled with overturned tables and chairs, coated in dust and cobwebs. It was larger now, more defined, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid, but still formless, indistinct. A sacrifice, to bind it back to the earth, to seal it away again. It's the only way to stop it now, to stop it from spreading. My breath hitched. Sacrifice. The word hung heavy in the air, echoing the ancient rituals, the blood on the altar. the entity paused its consumption, its swirling mass seeming to turn towards us, sensing our presence, sensing the new feast. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My eyes met the local guide's. Her gaze was resolute but tinged with sorrow. "One of us," she responded, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the entity's hunger. "A life offered willingly to anchor it, to contain it for good." The choice slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Sacrifice myself, and perhaps finally atone for the guilt that had devoured me for so long, the guilt of my past tragedy, or allow this malevolence to escape, to feast on the world, to spread its despair and its horror without end. The metallic scent in the air intensified, mingled with the cloying sweetness of decay. I could feel its hunger, a bottomless pit of ancient malice. It wanted me. It wanted my despair, my guilt, my life. And perhaps it was what I owed it. What I owed the world. What I owed myself. The choice, stark and terrible, had been made. There was no turning back, no other path. My hands, trembling not with fear but with a strange, cold resolve, closed around the ancient stone fragment I had unearthed weeks ago, the one that had pulsed with an almost imperceptible warmth. It felt like a piece of myself, something I had lost, and now, in this final, desperate moment, had found again. Atonement. It was a word that had haunted my waking hours and invaded my nightmares. Now it was a physical weight in my palm. The malevolence pulsed, a vast, hungry shadow at the periphery of my vision, not just in the air, but in the very marrow of my bones. It wanted out. It craved the boundless expanse of the world, the endless buffet of despair and fear that awaited it. It showed me fleeting, vivid images of my past tragedy, the faces of those I'd failed, twisting them into grotesque parodies of accusation. It wanted me to break, to succumb to the crushing weight of guilt. But I would not now. I stumbled forward, each step an act of defiance against the crushing pressure, towards the central cairn. The monoliths around me hummed, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the earth and up into my chest. This was the heart of it, the ancient wound, the place where the veil was thinnest. I knew what I had to do, a knowledge that hadn't come from any book or colleague's lecture, but from the stones themselves, from the very air I now breathed, heavy with forgotten rituals. I placed the stone fragment precisely into a small, star-shaped depression at the base of the largest standing stone, a fissure I had dismissed as natural erosion until now. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but an overwhelming presence, as if the stone itself had awakened, its ancient sleep disturbed. The malevolence roared a soundless internal scream that threatened to shatter my skull. It recoiled, a vast, formless thing scrambling back from the point of contact, but it was too late. I could feel it latching onto me, trying to use my own spirit as a fulcrum to resist the ceiling. "I am merely another vessel, William, a temporary prison, and I will break." I pressed my hands against the stone, channeling every ounce of my will, every fragment of my shattered spirit, into the desperate act. I felt a tearing sensation, not of flesh, but of something far more fundamental within me. It was as if I was being unraveled, thread by thread, my very essence becoming intertwined with the ancient magic of the site, binding myself to it, becoming a living, breathing part of the seal. The revelation was agonizing. I wasn't just activating the seal, I was becoming it. My sacrifice was not death, but an eternal tethering. A deep, profound, terrifying silence descended upon the Neolithic site. The humming of the monoliths faded. My body felt like an empty husk, my mind a fractured landscape. I was here, but I was also everywhere, connected to the earth, to the stones, to the thing trapped beneath. I could feel its presence still, a vast, dormant entity, contained but not destroyed, a coiled serpent waiting for its next opportunity. It was a constant thrum beneath my consciousness, a faint, malevolent heartbeat that would now forever echo in the chambers of my own. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, the grey Scottish sky stretching endlessly above me, before a primal need for shelter, for escape from the immediate vicinity of my new prison, propelled me to move. Each movement was agony, not physical, but a profound spiritual exhaustion. My legs were leaden, my vision swam, but I stumbled away from the cairn, away from the silent, watchful stones. The world outside the immediate circle of the ancient site was a blur of heather and rock. I moved like a ghost, barely aware of my surroundings, until a faint, almost dreamlike outline emerged from the mist-shrouded distance. A building, not ancient but abandoned. I dragged myself towards it, a phantom drawn to another forgotten place. A faded sign, half-rotted, still clung precariously above the main lodge, its cheerful painted letters chipped and peeling, spelling out a name I couldn't quite decipher nor cared to. Swings hung motionless from a rusted frame, their chains groaning softly in the wind, a forgotten world decaying gracefully. I pushed open a creaking door of one of the smaller cabins, the wood groaning in protest. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light filtering through gaps in the boarded-up windows. It smelled of damp wood, stale air, and the faint, lingering ghosts of long-departed laughter. I sank onto the lower bunk, the rough wooden slats biting into my skin, but I felt nothing. My gaze drifted to the ceiling, where a single dead fly was caught in a cobweb, a tiny, forgotten victim. I was free in a way. The world was safe for now, but I was also forever bound. I was the lark, and the malevolence was the key, always pressing, always testing. And I would be there, listening, for every restless twitch.